Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome back to EF Live, the show designed to help you buy, sell, and run your online business. We have a fantastic show lined up for you. Before I introduce our guest and our topic, I just want to mention that if you like our content today, hit that subscribe button on the bottom right side of our screen here to keep up to date with all of our content. So today, I have with me Greg Elfrink, the Director of Marketing at Empire Flippers. And we're going to be talking about some common mistakes that we see sellers make when going to sell their business. There's a lot of them, and we just kind of want to highlight some of the more common ones that we see so we can try to help you sell your business in the future. Greg, let's get him on here today. Let's welcome Greg on here. Greg, how are you doing today?
Hey Jake, I'm doing good. Can you hear me all right?
A little quiet, actually.
I think there's something messed up with my computer audio jack.
Well,
We were just talking about how I might switch to a Mac soon, and this is yet another symptom of the problem.
hey, just happy to have you here. Thank you for taking the time here, showing off our Empire Flippers t-shirts here, guys. Oh man, wrong side of the shirt. Here we go, Greg, you got one? Oh, look at that.
Yeah,
Look
right
at
here.
that, guys. Greg, how are you doing today?
I'm good, man. As you know, we were working a little bit earlier today in my office here in Saigon and planning out some content strategy, talking shop. So, doing good as always, man.
So, just so everyone knows, where are you and I both coming at the world from today?
We are both in Vietnam, my new home, more or less. I'm almost always here, and you're basically just across the street from
Yeah,
me.
it's so close, yet we can't walk. There's, it's within 100 yards or 100 meters, and there's just so much stuff in the way that you can't walk through. So you have to take a cab. It's kind of
Uh,
crazy. Where's
no one wants to walk through that herd of
No,
motorbikes.
no, it's kind of scary crossing the street here. Well, guys, before we dive in, I just want to thank you all again so much for being here today. And go ahead and let us know in YouTube and Facebook chat where you're watching from. Like we said, we're in Saigon, Vietnam, or Ho Chi Minh as it's otherwise known. And just really excited to have you all here. And a lot of times on these shows, we have some really interesting worldwide locations. And so we would love to hear where you are watching from today. Greg, do you have anything you'd like to say to the audience before we get going and dive into the common mistakes that we see sellers make?
Yeah, for sure. For anyone out there, especially sellers listening, and you're curious, what you can do to sell your business quicker, faster, for a bigger price, feel free to ask me, any questions throughout. We'll take questions throughout the show, I imagine. So, yeah, just, feel free to engage. I'm here to help you guys out there in internet land to sell your businesses at a bigger price point. So don't be shy.
In internet land, I like it. We have Bicech in Slovenia. I feel
Oh, Slovenia.
I feel like I should know where that. I feel like I should know where more countries are, but
We're gonna
we
work
do
on
got to
your
work on my geography.
geography.
Do you remember the Portugal comment?
I remember the Bangkok comment
Oh
too.
man, it's not good. It's not good, guys. But Greg is absolutely right. We will be taking your questions after the show. If you want to know anything else about how you can prepare to be a seller on Empire Flippers, definitely let us know on Facebook and YouTube, and we'll get to those questions by the end of the show, whether it be throughout or at the end. At the end, we will be trying to get to as many as we can, so let us know there. Greg, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about what you are, like what your position is, and why you are qualified to be talking about selling online businesses?
Sure. So I'm the director of marketing with Empire Flippers. So I oversee all of the marketing functions in the company. I manage our team. I come up with new projects, new ideas. I go to conferences. I've spoken in front of a few hundred entrepreneurs now in the stage. I have actually another conference where I'm going to be a keynote speaker at, actually in Bali, coming up in October. If anyone out there wants to come see me, it's the Digital Marketer Skillshare. I believe that's the name, DMSS. That would be in Bali. But yeah, anything that can grow our brand, that can make us help our clients more, help them out to understand this whole crazy world of buying and selling online businesses. That's what I do. And as you know, Jake, we are a big fan of leading our marketing through content. And so this is another example of just another outlet that we can communicate with our audience, educate them, teach them, and hopefully when they're ready to sell or buy, they come to us because, we gave them so much knowledge that they feel guilty not coming with us, right? That's the hope, anyways.
Well, it's also
but yeah.
absolutely, absolutely, and it's also a little more than that with this show specifically. This is kind of a platform where all of you, our fans at Empire Flippers, can come and ask us questions and interact with us here. Let us know anything you're dying to know because we really just do want to help. Now, Greg, before we get going here, Igor. Byseach is his YouTube name. Igor says, Greg, I freaking showed you in Chiang Mai where Slovenia is.
I know where Slovenia is. We were talking about Jake, Igor. And thank you for coming on. I miss you, Igor.
And then Jim is based out of Kentucky, but in Seattle today for company meetings. I've been to Seattle once. It was not as rainy as the stereotypes would say.
I've been to Seattle a lot too, and I got to say, it never really rained that much when I was there. I'm from Alaska originally, right? So I would used to fly down to Seattle all the time to go hang out there on Capitol Hill and a few other places with my buddies back when they were going to college down there.
Swig meets World, ahoy from Prague.
Ooh. A hardcore influencer has just arrived. A challenger approaches.
Let's see. Jose has a question for us, as well as hello here from Colombia. So where in Colombia are you from? I know we have some Empire Flippers, namely Swig, who are located in Medellin, Colombia. But where are you from, Jose? And he also asks, you, Greg, have you sold any high-ticket dropshipping businesses?
Yeah, it depends on what you define as high ticket. We have definitely sold multiple six figures dropshipping businesses. I think don't quote me on this number, but I think around the 500 to 700K mark with dropshipping. But yeah, we definitely have sold them. When you get to that level, definitely make sure you've invested in a good brand. Build your moat around that dropshipping business in ways that someone can't just find out what you're selling and just copy and paste your store, which is totally doable, by the way. In terms of building that moat, making your business more valuable because it's so hard to copy. But yeah, we've definitely sold high ticket dropshipping.
He means high ticket as in the product itself costs more than $500.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Absolutely. I would say dropshipping businesses that sell high ticket items are actually at more of an advantage than lower ticket dropshipping stores, because one of the biggest, or not the biggest, but a big challenge that dropshippers have is often the product takes forever to get to the customer, right? So you're looking at 14, 20 days sometimes for that product to ship out. And they're like, well, why would I buy from you when I can get this from Amazon Prime? So typically high ticket items, I think, works better, because if you're going to buy like a $2,000, $4,000 or even a $500 item, you're probably going to be a little bit okay with the wait because it's not really an impulse buy. So I think there's a slight advantage there, to be honest.
Oh, sorry, Greg. I got a little bit of a not serious but tech issue. The Facebook feed went down, so I apologize. Swig, if you're still there, can you let me know if it's back up? But we're gonna trudge on here. So, Greg, speaking of selling your online business, and Jose, speaking of selling your online business, if you get ready, we want to teach you how to avoid some of the common mistakes that we see. So let's go ahead and dive in here. And the first mistake that we see commonly here at Empire Flippers that we want to touch on today is we want to make sure that you don't stop running the business. You need to continue running the business as if you were going to keep it. Greg, can you talk about how you see that mistake done throughout, sellers?
Yeah, for sure. And it happens in a few different ways. I think the main mistake, like why this happens, is kind of a mindset thing. Like, oh, I just listed my site, my dropshipping store, whatever it is with Empire Flippers. It's basically out of my hands now. I'm not going to run it. I'm not going to do anything. It's basically sold. problem is it's not sold, right? So most of our businesses, I'd say, sell within 30 to 60 days. But you got to remember, if so your business is sold within 60 days or maybe even 90 days, so month 3 you're on our marketplace still. We are doing price updates every month. Unlike a lot of other brokers, we try to keep the valuation of the business as up to date as possible, versus other brokers, when they list the business, they're like, oh, this is the price forever, regardless, as long as it's on the marketplace. We're not going to look at the P&Ls again or anything like that. We actually look at the P&Ls on a monthly basis to make sure everything we're marketing is still accurate, right? So that price fluctuation can deeply hurt your valuation if you just step what's that term, take the pedal off the gas. That's what I was going for. If you take the pedal off the gas, then your business might tank, then your valuation will tank. And the other thing is, like, even if we didn't do price updates and someone makes a deposit on your business and they say, like, hey, this business said it was making 8 grand a month, but you stopped running Facebook ads because you're not managing them anymore. Now it's only making like 1 grand a month. I definitely don't want to buy this. What's happening here? It sends a bunch of red flags to the potential buyer. Like, wow, this seller really doesn't care about this this business, right? So I would advise every seller to walk in, like, if you submit your business for sale with us, walk in with the mindset as if you did not. And we'll get into how that depends on point number 3 here about being responsive. But walk into it as if you're not selling the business, as if you're still growing the business. Now, you might not do a big web redesign or something like that, but the day-to-day of the business you should definitely be doing and maintaining until you get that money into your bank account, when a buyer actually sends in the wire and the business has been fully migrated over to that person. Only then can you start taking taking a backseat role. If you have an earnout, which we'll discuss later, you might still be involved in the business a bit, but ultimately you should never stop working on the business until it's actually sold.
So that brings up two questions that I have here. And the first is, when talking about selling your business, is it better to outsource that work? Would a buyer rather have higher expenses because you've outsourced that time? Or would they rather see the business listed as lower expenses, but the business taking this amount of time to run?
So there's so many things. It depends. I'd say on average, it's the first option, where the seller is spending more money to have a task that he doesn't need to do effectively ran by someone else. Because while that will hurt your valuation a little bit, because you don't have that extra net profit for that multiple to multiply with, it makes the business more attractive. And sometimes there's more value in making your sales price just a little bit lower, but making the business much more attractive. Because remember, a lot of buyers are looking for a turnkey solution. They're looking for an already profitable business. They're looking for one that they don't buy a $80,000, $800,000 job, right? They're looking for an asset, a machine that's working, that's running smoothly. So taking that little ding on your valuation, because usually these expenses are not that much to outsource a lot of different tasks. Even if you have like in-house teammates, it's usually not that much in comparison to what you gain by making the business more attractive to that buyer.
That brings up a really good point, and I like the way you said it. Buyers don't want to buy a job. They want to buy, and they're investing. They're trying to get their money back. They're not trying to buy a job. So
Exactly.
on
Yeah.
average, and obviously the ultimate answer is it depends. There will be businesses that require 40 hours a week to run from the buyer, and they'll buy it. And there will be businesses that take 0 hours a week to run, and those will get sold too. But my question is on average, what is the amount of time investment from the seller that they should be aiming for?
Honestly, as little as possible would be my answer. If the seller, like, if the business takes a lot of unique skill set from the seller to run the business effectively, that might not transfer over well with the buyer, right? Because the buyer sees the seller putting in all this work, all this effort, and perhaps some unique skill set. They're like, well, how can I duplicate that? Versus if that seller had an SOP that they wrote out and they have a VA or a team member in house, or maybe even an agency they're outsourcing this stuff to, they can hand that over to the buyer, and the buyer's like, okay, I don't know how to do this, but I have an SOP. He has an agency he's working with, and he also gave me an SOP on how to hire another agency or another VA or another team member in case this person quits. So I feel confident that I can duplicate this now. So to me, that is very very important with the seller. Now, there's nothing wrong if you're working 40 hours a week on a business and it's like this awesome business, like a SaaS business that's growing just dramatically, and you're spending a lot of your personal time. But always keep in mind, how can I make this more into a machine where I'm not working in the business, I'm not doing the grunt tasks, I'm working on the business, focusing on the grand vision, how can I grow it bigger, stuff like that.
Can you give the audience an example of the difference of between those two kinds of tasks, between working in the business and working on? Like, give specific tasks as an example.
Sure. So let's say you're running a content site, a big authority site. Your main traffic method is SEO, right? You might have a small team of VAs. You might have hundreds of pages of content. Now, a grunt task where you're working in the business, you're not valuing your time effectively, especially if the business is making money. Now, if you aren't making any money yet from your content site, it's totally fine to do this stuff yourself. But once you start making money, you should start outsourcing it. And the first one is content. So you should not be writing hundreds and hundreds of articles about I don't know, baking, or how to play a musical instrument, or whatever your site is about. You should not be the one actually penning those blog posts. You should have an agency or a team of writers doing that stuff for you. Likewise, you should be using outreach tools. You should have a VA that's using outreach tools instead. All that kind of stuff, like link building. Even you can have a agency do that, or hire someone in-house to do that. So those are grunt daily tasks, versus working on the business from an authority site perspective might be, what is a better content strategy? What are my competitors doing? What are my competitors monetizing with that I'm not monetizing with? And how can I come up with a plan to put that monetization into my authority site? Or how can I come up with a plan to make my writers better, producing content for a cheaper cost that still maintains high quality? Those kind of stuff. Those are like bigger picture things about building the system, and you want to be more in the position where you're building the system instead of you're the one pulling the lever in the system, if that
Mm-hmm.
makes sense.
And that brings up a really good point. You mentioned before how you don't necessarily need to be working a ton of time trying to expand the business, trying to grow the business. You just got to make sure that you don't drop off. You keep the business at least where it's at. So I guess that, what if you have a fantastic idea for where the business could go, right? You see a massive opportunity, you see something that you could do to try to grow the business, and you think, okay, well, should I do this now, or do I want to wait until a buyer takes over and say, hey, here's an awesome opportunity for you? Which route would you go?
Yeah, that's a good question. I say I would probably, since I'm already selling the business, I might not want to embark on that large project, right? So that goes back to what I was saying earlier. Like, when you're maintaining the business because you're selling it, there's a difference between maintaining it to sell the business and owning the business to grow the business, right? So if I wanted to grow the business, I might do this huge project with web design that costs me thousands of dollars to redesign everything, CRO it, all that kind of stuff. But if I wanted to sell the business, and let's go back to the content side example, maybe I'm publishing, I don't know, 4 articles per week, and that's my maintenance mode on that site. I would keep that up. I would keep publishing those 4 articles every week, like I always do on the site. But I wouldn't really invest my time and capital into starting this big project. Now, I would tell the buyer about it. I would tell them, like, hey, look, I built this entire framework on how I was going to do this. I can give that to you as just an added bonus if you buy the
Mm-hmm.
business. And that could be very attractive to a buyer, especially a more newbie buyer who may be a little bit cautious about buying. Maybe it's their first site, and for a person who's it's their first site, it could be a lot of money, right? So when you have that SOP there to hand them, like, hey, here's the roadmap of where I see this business can go. All you need to do is just follow it when you buy the business. I think that's a much better route than spending your money on an asset you're selling.
How does having those kinds of tools like the SOP, like other processes in place, having plans, how does that affect the valuation of the business?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it goes back to what I was talking about between cutting expenses and making your business more attractive. Well, cutting expenses will make your business more valuable. It makes it less attractive. So the chances of you selling it becomes less. optimal, you could say. So to answer your question, sorry, yeah. So SOPs, they don't necessarily increase your valuation, but they do make your business more attractive,
Hmm.
right? So you're not going to get a bigger sales price, but you'll likely sell the business faster, which more money now is more important, right? And in an earnout situation where they put some money down and they pay you out later, by having really good SOPs and other systems in place like that you can hand off, it makes the business more attractive, which makes the buyer more confident. So if you counter with that buyer for a larger upfront fee, they feel more confident in your business to say, okay, well, maybe I will give you some more and make it a shorter earnout period because you have all these systems in place. I have faith that this business can keep running and growing and all that good stuff. So I'm willing to pay a little bit more. So that makes the business more attractive. It doesn't necessarily increase or decrease your valuation. It's just one of those good things to
Hmm.
have. And a good way to look at SOPs, by the way, is like an operations manual, right? Like if you bought a table from Home Depot or something like that, it comes with a little instruction manual on how to put it together. That's kind of what your SOP should be, is the owner's manual to your
Hmm.
business.
And Jose, I think that's going to answer your question right there. He asked, so usually a business has a higher valuation when the business is low maintenance. I think that kind of answers your question right there, where it may not necessarily raise your valuation, but it is going to make it much more attractive and therefore could lead to a quicker sale.
Yeah, and to be clear, I'm talking about low maintenance more on the seller side. Like you might have a huge business where you have like 20 people working full time for you every
Hmm.
week, clock in 40 hours. Now, is that business running smooth or is it choppy? And that's where systems come in place. And that's what a buyer would like to see. There's nothing wrong with someone working 40, even 60 hours on the business, as long as they're working on the right things and they have the opportunity to work on the right things where, they're not putting out fires all the time in the
Hmm.
business.
So moving along here to the second mistake that we're going to talk about today, unless you have a final thought on continuing to run the business.
Unless there's any questions, Jose, hopefully I answered your question well, but if you need a follow up, just hit up Jake. He'll ask
Yes,
me.
definitely let us know, guys. We will have be doing dedicated Q&A at the end. But I do want to take a moment to call out Rahul and Fiona over on Facebook here. Fiona's coming at us from LA. So I saw something really interesting today. It's totally off topic side note, but apparently there's petition to split up California into different states. I don't know. Fascinating stuff. Topic for a different time. But Greg,
I've seen that 3 times in the last
yeah,
few
I know.
days.
It just keeps popping up. People just want to do that. It's, you know, one of these days it's going to happen. So
Alaska wants to do it too, weirdly enough. Anyways, yeah, your
yeah.
question.
So the second mistake that we're going to be talking about today is going to be specifically for an e-commerce store is having too much inventory. So, Greg, where do people go wrong?
Yeah, so this is a surprisingly common issue, and you think it'd be kind of common sense not to do this, but a lot of e-commerce owners, FBA tends to be in particular a problem with this is they don't understand logistics very well. So let's say you have a $500,000 Amazon FBA business, that's what it's worth on our marketplace, but then you have $500,000 worth of inventory too. So you're basically asking the buyer to buy $1 million business because they also buy the inventory from you, right? And it's just there's no reason to have that much inventory. So before you sell, take a hard look at your inventory. Like, am I overloaded, and why am I overloaded? Do I have a bunch of SKUs that are just not selling anymore? Like that, if you have a bunch of SKUs with a bunch of inventory that are not selling, that will take years for the depletion of your inventory. Well, oh, that's not a good sign. Like maybe that product was a great profitable product in the past, but maybe the trend or whatever died down and no one's buying it anymore. That's not a great sign to a buyer to look at, and it makes the business pretty unattractive. It's a bit unreasonable for a person to buy a business where the inventory is worth the same amount as the business or even half of the
Mm-hmm.
business. So for e-commerce store owners in particular, just pay particular attention to that, how much inventory you have, because that can really hurt you in the final parts of the deal where the due diligence is almost done. You're getting offers, you're doing negotiations, you're doing buyer seller conference calls, and then they realize, like the buyer realizes, like, why do you have so much inventory? I don't understand. So that's a really common issue with e-commerce sellers. Another issue with e-commerce sellers is the P&L, the profit and loss
But before
statement.
we get to the P&L,
They
Greg, yeah,
Sure,
so
sure, yeah,
do
yeah.
you, how often have you seen deals fall apart because of the inventory mismanagement?
Well, we try to, massage the deal and make sure the seller is flexible, which we can talk about later on the negotiation side, right? So, unfortunately, we have seen a few deals fall because of this. We do try to, mediate between the buyer and the seller to make something work here. And sometimes the seller just needs to be okay with taking a loss. It was at the end of the day their mistake for ordering so much inventory, and really they need to be the one to bite that bullet versus the buyer. The buyer isn't looking to buy your mistake, right? So that's a very important thing to look at. If you're looking at selling in the next like 6 to 12 months, I would take a very close look at your inventory management. Make sure you're doing it right. Making sure you don't have too much inventory, but you still have enough inventory to sell. And if your business has been around for a couple of years, you can look at historical sales data. I think there's a few tools out there. I don't know any of the tools by name. I think Scoopana might do this, where you can look at your trends over time, and it will predict like how much inventory you might need to accomplish the next month's sales. Like if you're going to Christmas, you can look at previous trends along with your growth pattern to order the right amount of
Mm-hmm.
product. I don't know if it's super accurate, but I believe Scoopana does that.
So in a scenario where you see a seller having too much inventory, you mentioned that Empire Flippers likes to kind of help them out, help them through that, massage the deal, as you said, and try to work things out. So, would you recommend a seller, if you find yourself with too much inventory, to kind of take a step back and think, okay, well maybe I should work through this inventory problem and then list?
Absolutely. So one of the biggest things, and the whole sales process really starts right before you submit the site, right? Or even a few months before you submit the site, because certain things are going to come up towards the late stage that often might not come up in the beginning stages of the sale. Your business might be a totally legitimate business, passes vetting, all that good stuff, gets listed on our marketplace. We do the marketing, everything's going good. A lot of depositors, a lot of people doing due diligence. Then you get on the buyer seller conference calls. The buyer and you like each other, and then come down to brass tacks. This inventory issue pops up. So by not handling it before you submit the site for sale, you or the business for sale rather, you are just setting yourself up for failure. So you want to mitigate as many of those kind of latent bombs before you actually submit the business for sale. So think about that before you sell, preferably a few months before you list. If you need help, though, if you need like, well, what other bombs are there? We have an entire team of business analysts you can set up a actual call with, and they'll help you walk through some exit planning and some common sense strategies that you can apply that you may not have thought of because you're not in this business day in and day out selling other businesses,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that is something we do help you with as as a potential seller on our marketplace.
So let's say you go on empireflippers.com and you use our valuation tool and try to figure out how much your business is worth. So let's say you do that and you discover that you have a $200,000 business right here, an e-commerce business.
Mm.
How much should you have in inventory? In inventory, you're talking about having too much inventory versus the valuation price, right? So what's that
Yeah.
percentage? What's that ratio?
I think your inventory costs at the end of the day should be less than 50% of the actual value of the business. So if it is $200,000 business, you should not have over $100,000 worth of inventory. And even like $95,000 worth of inventory on a 200K business is quite a bit. So even lower is better. But I think 50% is probably the max
Mm-hmm.
threshold. Of course, sometimes depending on when you sell the business, there might be certain periods of time in your business's life cycle where you do have, say, $120,000 worth of product on a $200,000 business because next month you're going to sell through all of it. Maybe it's a seasonal product and you need to stock up before that season
Mm-hmm.
hits, right? So sometimes you do have that and it's okay, but most of the time it's not a good
Mm-hmm.
idea.
So moving on here, back toward the topic that you really wanted to dive in before. So P&Ls. Where do people go wrong with P&Ls?
Yeah, there's a lot of issues that could come up with P&Ls. My best advice, and I think this is really good advice for our sellers, because at the end of the day, you are not an accountant, you are not a bookkeeper. Well, maybe you were before you started the business, and in that case, your P&L is probably golden, right? But most of us are not. I'm certainly not. I'm terrible with numbers. I'm terrible with math. So instead of cobbling it together yourself, use like some software to help you. QuickBooks is very good. They can help you figure all that stuff out. And you will also, just hire a bookkeeper to help you set up a system, maybe even just to set up QuickBooks and teach you how to do it, and then you can just do it every month yourself. And there's a few things this does. So say we were talking about latent bombs, things that can come up in late stage due diligence that ruins the deal, kills the deal. And erroneous P&L, even if it's a small inconsequential error on that P&L, it spooks the buyer because the buyer looks at that P&L as the very lifeblood of the business, right? That is one of the most important documents you have. And if there's an error on it, well, that sends a signal to the buyer like, well, what else is wrong? Maybe they're not reporting accurate things on their PPC campaigns, or something else is wrong in the system. I have to restart my entire due diligence process on this, and that can make the sales cycle go much longer by having a bad P&L. So it's definitely worth the money to hire a bookkeeper or spend the time to get this right. And even if you don't sell the business, this is great advice for you to do, because every single month you can look at your P&L, your profit and loss statement, and you can do P&Ls for content sites too, with our all affiliate, like how much did I spend on content, how much am I earning, things like that. And it just gives you a good life signal of where your business is at, where it's trending, where's some pitfalls, you might be making less money than you originally thought too. So, or you might be making more. So that's also a good thing. Usually it's probably a little bit less because most people's P&Ls are pretty messy. And speaking on that front of P&L, there's two other things that are kind of attached to this, and one of them is bank accounts. If you are, a solopreneur, it's very common for a solopreneur to use the same bank account as their personal account for their business account. I wouldn't recommend that. It's very easy to just set up a business bank account, have all your money from your business be put in there, and then you can, do withdrawals or however you want to do it to your personal account. And that just makes things a bit cleaner and a lot clearer, especially if you're running multiple different businesses and you're only selling one business. That bank account should be dedicated just to that one business, ideally. So it's very easy to show the buyer, the money actually coming in, all that stuff. The third point about this related to P&Ls is, if you want to get, let's say you have an $800,000, $900,000 Amazon FBA business or e-commerce store, you have a potential buyer, he wants financing done, and he chooses to go like a SBA route, a government funded loan that's provided by multiple hundreds of independent banks across America. If your taxes aren't paid, which is kind of a segue from the P&L, but it's still important. If your taxes are not paid on your e-commerce store, that's going to be an issue later on the SBA. Like if your tax information does not match what you're saying you earn, which is very common actually, because again, most of us aren't tax people, then that is an issue with the SBA program. Often you won't get financing, and it kills you later on when you want to get a bigger upfront amount for your business. So instead of getting $700,000 upfront for your 800, 900K business, you might only get 500K, or maybe even less, depending on how much liquid that buyer has. So that's, I think, a very important thing to think about. If you're 12 months out and you had just from selling the business, and say the business has been around for, I don't know, 3 years, it might be worthwhile to hire a tax professional. It'll probably cost you a few, $1,000, maybe not even less, depending on your situation, to figure out your tax situation in your e-commerce business, because it can get complicated, especially if you're selling, across the different states with all sorts of different tax issues. There is a company that can help you, especially on the e-commerce side, called TaxJar. They actually work with a lot of e-commerce businesses, and they can help you out to make sure your tax returns actually match with what you're saying. So if you do go down the SBA route, at least you got that all taken care of. It's not another bomb that can explode on you late in negotiations.
And that brings up a really good point. If you want more information on setting up your P&Ls, doing all your accounting work, we actually talked about this in a previous EF Live episode. We went into specifics on compiling your P&Ls. and the different strategies between doing it yourself and hiring a company or using software. So definitely check that out if you have more information. But I guess if I just wanted to give my big takeaway on getting your P&Ls and other paperwork and other things like bank account information, everything in order, my advice would be do it now. Don't do it now and do it throughout the lifetime of the business. Don't go, it's easier to do it over 3 years than to try to get 3 years worth of data done in a weekend when you go to sell.
I hope Igor is listening to that. So Igor, if you just heard that, make sure you do that.
Yeah, does
Igor is a good buddy of mine.
yeah,
so.
does he not do a good
Wanna
job
make sure
keeping track of his P&Ls?
I'm not sure. I just wanted to call him out for no reason. So.
Well, speaking of not doing a good job of keeping track of your P&Ls, so this is less of an issue when it comes to Empire Flippers because of our vetting process. We go to great lengths to make sure that all of the numbers and everything check out, right? But let's say something does slip past our vetting team, or it's a deal not on Empire Flippers, whether it be through another brokerage or if you do it yourself. So what happens when you buy a business that has some skeletons in its closet? Like, let's say there's some tax issues that the seller didn't take care of, and are you in legal trouble, or can you go after the seller for that?
To be honest, I don't know the answer to that question. It's definitely something that a buyer should pay attention to before they buy the business, right? Like, if you're buying a $1 million business, it's like a drop in the bucket to have a lawyer look over everything, the legal documents and stuff. Now, I'm not a big fan of using lawyers for most of the time in buying a business, and the reason why is it's in the lawyer's interest just to tell you it's not a good deal, because if he does tell you it's a good deal and then there's a skeleton he misses in the closet, then that mars his reputation. But if he tells you it's not a good deal and you don't do it, you still paid him and it doesn't hurt his reputation. So they're going to be a lot more conservative on what they say is a good deal than what an average entrepreneur is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't take everything they say as like the holy word. Take it as with a grain of salt. Like, thank you for your input, I will consider that. But it is worthwhile to get some help on those issues, because it also might change. If you're buying an Australian business, do you pay Australian taxes? I don't know, maybe. And if you're in America, like, why are you beholden to Australian taxes if the guy was Australian but his e-commerce store was selling things in America, right? It can get weirdly complicated just from like that scenario alone. So I would recommend seeking out some professional help.
So speaking of negotiations, and whether you bring a lawyer or not to the table, we want to make sure that as a seller we're willing to negotiate, right?
Yeah, and this, before we dive into negotiations, I want to say one last thing that kind of segues into negotiations, because if you're not doing this, you're probably not negotiating. And this is surprisingly fairly common, is where the seller is unresponsive. So the seller sets up their ticket in our Zendesk. Maybe Jake here sends out his seller interview request, and they're like, don't have time for that. And like, okay, well, you want to sell your business, right? Like, this is a powerful marketing tool. You should respond with, yes, I will do that seller interview, right? Or if a salesperson asks you a question and you don't get back to him for 4 days, that's 4 more days that buyer who could be a very serious buyer might have moved on now, because he's like, all right, well, this guy's obviously not serious. You'll talk to the business analyst, show me a different business where the seller is hyperactive because I want to get a deal done today. So always be extremely responsive, hyper responsive. I say check your email constantly throughout the sales process. It can be a bit of boring or annoying, tedious to check all these emails over and over again. But if you're selling a 6-figure business, a multiple 6-figure, even a 7-figure business, checking your email a few times every day is probably worth your while. So I do want to get that out there. You should be extremely responsive when you're selling your business.
And that, you brought up a good point here. Now, I was going to bring this up towards the end, but not to kind of pat myself on the back here. But here at Empire Flippers, we do these seller interviews, and they are a very powerful sales tool. When sellers ask, oh, what can I do to help the sales process? do your seller interview.
Absolutely. And for those out there like, that doesn't really work. I literally have proof of a guy who was selling back when I was doing the seller interviews, it was like a 400K business, and he kept writing me off for a bit, not responding to me to do the seller interview. And the buyer was like, I love this business. I think it's great. I have the money. I'll pay full cash up front, but I'm not going to buy it until I watch the seller
Mm-hmm.
interview. It's like, the seller finally responded to me when I told him that. But that just goes to show you how powerful a seller interview can be. And for those out there, Jake does an awesome job. I actually think he's better at it than I was. So great job there,
Well,
Jake.
thank you, Greg.
Double pat on the
Oh,
back.
thank you, thank you. Now, in all seriousness, though, it's a very easy interview, and it's a very powerful sales tool. And not doing that seller interview is actually a big mistake that we see a lot of sellers do. And
Yeah, especially at the
mhm.
higher end. What was the range, Jake? And you said basically anything over 600K, they get a little bit
I'd
less
say even
responsive, which to me
400K.
is
I'd say even
crazy.
400K.
Yeah.
Anything below 400K, like you go to our marketplace, anything below 400K, probably anywhere between 60 and 80% of the listings have seller interviews, and you go above 600K, and it's probably lower than 20%. And it's
Yeah,
not.
absolutely.
We've reached out. Be a fascinating case study to figure out why.
It would be. It would be. If only we knew the answer. The seller interview it works as a marketing and sales tool, as we mentioned. And one of the things it does for you, like say you did have this big business, you're like, oh, this YouTube video won't move the needle for me because the right depositor is just going to buy the business anyway when they look at it. That's not always the case. People love buying from people they know, like, and trust. And when you're on that seller interview, you're talking to Jake, and you're going through kind of
Mm-hmm.
your story of how you built this business. That makes the potential depositors, potential buyers know, like, and trust you before they have to do anything, without them having to take any kind of commitment at all in terms of cost on them. They don't have to make a deposit. They don't need to talk to a sales guy. They don't need to get you on a conference call to get to know you. They already kind of know you by the time they get to those points, which makes your ability to negotiate with that person, if you're a likable guy in the seller review at least, right, to be a little bit easier. So it's definitely worth your while if you're selling with us, for sure.
And I mean, even more so, let's say that last April for you, you had a big drop in sales, but it wasn't due to anything wrong with the business. It was due, say you ran out of inventory or something else that doesn't actually mean the business is dying, because it jumped right back up in May. A
Mm-hmm.
potential buyer could look at that and see red flag, but then when they hear the seller interview and hear your explanation, then they may still go ahead and make that deposit.
Absolutely. That's another great thing about doing a seller interview. It mitigates those potential bombs that might throw off a sale by giving you the opportunity to tell the story
Mm-hmm.
of the business. People are interested in that story. Like, say they looked at that dip, like, there's no way I would make a deposit on this. Look at this, falling trend, but I will watch the seller interview because I'm still, like, kind of interested in what this business is about. And then they hear that, like, oh, I didn't think about that. Like, that makes total sense why that happened. I'm going to make a deposit and start my due diligence
Mm-hmm.
right now.
And I guess that just brings us back to our point of whether we're talking about doing the seller interview or bringing it to negotiations and communicating with potential buyer or communicating with the Empire Flippers team in general. Be responsive. Be responsive. Check your email. Don't let any message go by, because what if you miss a message that says, "Hey, I want to buy your business"? You know, like,
Yeah, yeah. And that could be some
mm-hmm,
life-changing income depending on how big your business is.
absolutely.
And you missed it just because you didn't check your email. Like, it's
Mm.
crazy.
Absolutely. So now let's talk about being flexible with negotiations. Now, obviously, when you go to sell your business, you have an idea, especially after you use the valuation tool, of what you want to get from the sale. And you have an expectation of how much the business is worth even before you use the valuation tool. So,
Mm.
Greg, why do people need to be extra flexible with negotiations?
The negotiations is a super important part. Before I dive too into it, one good thing a seller should have, say you submitted your site for sale with us or your business for sale with us, we give you the multiple on it. You're like, okay, this is a good multiple. I agree. Please list it. you should have in your mind, what is the minimum amount I'm willing to accept for this business? And there should always be leeway there. So like we had a guy, his business was listed for $250,000, and he saw some downward trends happening in that business, and which we were transparent about with all the potential buyers. So he was willing to actually take 170K for that site. Now we sold it for 230K, which he was shocked by. He didn't think he was going to get that much at all. So it was still 20K less than what the valuation was, but it was $50,000 more than what he thought he was going to get. But he had the negotiation room because he had that minimum threshold where he could discount his business a bit and still walk away happy. So your minimum threshold price should be, this is my hard minimum of what I would like if I did the deal, I'd still be very happy I did the deal. That's my advice to sellers when they're thinking about what should the bottom of my negotiations be. As far as negotiations in general, sometimes you just need to be flexible to get the deal done, right? Like a lot of people don't say it's a $600,000 business, they might have $300,000, $400,000 in liquid that they can give you. Most people don't have $600,000 in liquid that they can just hand over. So sometimes you need to do some creative financing, which can lead into earnout situations. Where in that 600K example, let's say they put 400K down, so you get 400,000 up front, and then $200,000 paid out in an earnout scenario, right? You might want to be flexible on that, depending on how many other depositors have come in. Now, you might have rules attached to that earnout that would still work kind of in your favor, and make sure you get that money and all that good stuff. But if you're not willing to negotiate, if you're like, no, this is the list price Empire Flippers gave me, this is the price I'm selling at, it might take you a long time to sell that business, and cash is king now, not later, right? So the opportunity cost of you not being flexible could end up meaning you ultimately, that buyer who could have paid you the full 600K, he went and bought it from someone else who was flexible, and now the only person that seems to be hitting up your business is giving you a far lower offer where you won't get at even close to the 600K, and that could happen. We try to mitigate that. Obviously, we sell most of our businesses pretty close to list price, but it's something to be aware of. And in negotiations in general, it's kind of a dance. So in order to be an effective negotiator, you got to understand, in order to get something, you got to give something. So say in the 600K example, you want a big chunk up front. Say you want 500K up front, or 450K up front. You might have to discount the total cost of your business. Say, like, all right, I want $450,000 up front, and instead of it costing 600K, it'll be 510 or 520. So I'll give you an $80,000 discount if you give me all the upfront money now. And that's a good counter. If someone gave you an offer initially with a long earnout, you might counter where you lower your overall value of your business by a bit to get a higher amount up front and to mitigate how long that earnout and how big the earnout is. Now, if you want full list price, if you want to make as much possible money as possible, you might want to, you might have to actually accept a lower upfront amount with a longer earnout to get that bigger amount of money. So it's always a give and take when it comes to negotiations.
What would you say, Greg, to a seller who goes into negotiations, goes to list their business, and says, I am not open to an earnout?
It depends on the size of the business. There's a 40K, 100K site, or even really anything beneath 300K. It's not a terrible issue. We can usually find buyers who are willing to buy it. I will say it will hurt your ability to sell the business. If you're not flexible, if you're very rigid, you become kind of like the proverbial tree in a hurricane, right? That's too rigid, it won't bend, so it just breaks. The trees that, for the people who aren't up to date on the hurricane knowledge, a tree that bends during a hurricane actually survives the hurricane. In case that reference just went over anyone's head. I'm sure it did it for you, Jake.
Hey, I lived through the hurricane that went through Florida last year. It was crazy. The streets were flooded. Trees were down. Some trees snapped. Some trees did not snap. Now we know why.
That versatility is all about flexibility.
I don't know, man. Like it's hard because you obviously go into these negotiations knowing that this is your baby, this is your business that you built, and you don't want to get out of it less than what you feel it's worth. And there are times when you go in and you think, you know, I'm kind of on the fence about selling it anyway. If it goes for 600,000, then I'll take it. If I get an offer of $400,000, like, you know, I want to keep this business. So what would you say to a seller then?
I'd say in that scenario, that's totally fine. Like if you don't need to sell the business, if you just want to see if you can get the 600K, you'd be really happy to get that 600K. Just let our salespeople know, like, hey, look, no pressure, guys, but I'm only wanting this offer. Now you have to go into that knowing because of your unflexibility, you might not be able to sell the business, right? Now, you maybe a depositor comes in and they have plenty of money and it's all hunky dory and that's great. But as long as you have the expectations of like, hey guys, I'm realizing I'm not being very flexible. It's not going to help a lot during the negotiation phase. No pressure on you guys. It's fine. If you go in with that expectation, that's going to take you way longer to sell. It's totally
Mm-hmm.
fine. If you come in with the expectation, I want to sell this thing quick. You're going to give me full list price, all up front. I say, well, you might be living more in the Fantasyland world, and that probably won't happen. So maybe our sales guys need to coach you a little bit more on negotiations work.
You know, you've thrown out a few statistics here. Actually, they're kind of statistics because you didn't use numbers, you used the word most. But I want to touch on both of them. Before we do, though, I just want to reiterate, guys, as we move to wrap up here in a few minutes, definitely ask us any questions that you have in Facebook or YouTube chat. We want to get to any questions you may have. If whether it's about selling, buying, or some other third thing, hurricanes. We want to be able to answer your questions.
Ask me all the hurricane questions, please. Only hurricane questions. As it relates to buying and selling online
No,
businesses,
no,
I want to see some
only
creative
only hurricanes, not. So, okay, the two stats kind of that you mentioned. The first one is you said most businesses that we list sell within 2 to 3 months. So when you say most,
Yeah.
most could be 51% and most could be 99%. As you know, Greg, like you and I, we've had this discussion before.
We have indeed. Yeah, so I don't know the exact percentage on my head, off the top of my head, but I believe it's like around, it's above 90%, I'm pretty sure, sell within 3 months. So and that's all businesses of all monetizations and, all valuation prices. A thing to note is as the price of your business goes up, as you get into the more mid and high six figures and seven-figure ranges, the time to sell your business actually does expand, right? Go figure. As the bigger business, there's probably more due diligence and all that stuff that needs to be involved. It's not like a $80,000 Amazon affiliate site that could be bought off our marketplace within 2 weeks with someone who has credit on file with us, right? So just realize going into it, if your business is a bigger business, there's a higher chance it's going to take more on the long side to sell. Now, with that said, we did just recently, a few months ago, sell a seven-figure business, and I believe it took us like 43 or 45 days to sell it. The case studies actually just went live on our blog. If anyone out there wants to read it, it's the most recent blog post on there.
And the second statistic here is you said that most businesses that are listed. See that there's two kind of statistics in this one that you said. You said
Good.
most businesses that are listed sell close to list price. So when you say again most, just ballpark it. How are we talking 50 or are we talking most? Yeah, I did it too. I did it too.
Yeah, so like almost every business we sell, which again probably in the 90% range or above. I think the last time I looked at it was like 95%. So within 10% of the list price. So within 10% of the actual valuation we gave you and listed on the marketplace is typically the amount of money you're going to get. Again, though, that can change the bigger the business is, because the bigger the business is, you'll probably have a more negotiation, so that could be a bit different and doesn't necessarily reflect the true picture of like a 700 to 1.2 million dollar business. Because if we have we get businesses in the 20 to 50K range almost every week, and those are sold super quick for full list price all the time. So that data point can get a little skewed.
And it's going to be time for questions now. Greg, do you have anything you want to add before we get rolling with some questions here?
Yeah, I guess I'll wrap it up before answering anyone's questions. Is most of the stuff like these common seller mistakes, they are also just common sense to think about, from a buyer perspective. So a good exercise if you're looking at selling your business is ask yourself, if you were the buyer looking at the business you have built, would you buy it? Say it was gave yourself a random multiple of like 25x of the net profit, the monthly net profit. Would you buy that business, and what would you look at when you're buying that business? Put yourself in the feet of the buyer, just like you do like when you have a business, you invest in the copywriting, speak to your target market so you can convert those people to buy your product, right? Now when it comes to selling your business, it's time for you to do the same thing. Ask yourself, who is this buyer? What does he care? What would he care about? What are they going to be looking at, so you can frame your own marketing, because now your number one customer you're looking at is the
Mm-hmm.
buyer of your business instead of whoever's buying your e-commerce products. Now this investor is your customer avatar. So I think it's useful to think of it in that way, because most entrepreneurs, they know marketing, at least somewhat, and by playing that little role playing game, you might come up with a bunch of common sense things you never thought about just because you didn't put yourself in a buyer's
Mm-hmm.
shoes.
So, Greg, get ready because we have quite a few questions here.
Oh,
So,
good, good. I can't wait.
we're gonna
Hurricane related,
hurricane
I hope.
related. So, starting here from your buddy Igor here. So, when preparing for a hurricane, what kind of raincoat? No, no, no. Okay. So, actually, from your buddy Igor though, he has two questions here. So, question one: these are all prices without tax included for the businesses, correct? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's correct. Everyone's tax situation is going to be a bit different. Again, I would ask a legal professional, tax professional to walk you through all that
Mm-hmm.
kind of stuff.
And question two, is there a sweet spot range where investors are looking at, let's say, are they trying to buy 100 to 200,000 businesses, or are they trying to buy seven-figure businesses?
I'd say it depends on the investor, which isn't a great answer. But it does depend. Like I would say from a like a big portfolio buyer, they're probably looking for bigger businesses, like at least above 400K. Because one of the things to realize is like if you have capital, when you're buying a bigger business, it's often easier to make that bigger business into an even bigger business than a smaller business into a big
Mm-hmm.
business. Similar to just like building a site from scratch, right? You have a new domain, new website, you put content on, you're in the Google sandbox, it's going to take you a while. Versus if you bought a business that was out of the sandbox and making money, you could do things like conversion rate optimization on it automatically and increase that potential earnings within a month. Versus doing CRO on a site that's brand new, that's making nothing, doesn't really make sense because there's not even any traffic. You have nothing to work with, basically. So the bigger the business is, the more resources that business has to work with, the more there is for a investor to build upon. Now, some investors love small sites, and they'll buy those sites up like all day long, and those are 50 to $200,000 range. But as their portfolio sites get bigger, what I tend to see is they start focusing also on bigger sites because they realize they just have more resources to make that site from a big site into a gargantuan site, or a big business into a gargantuan
Mm-hmm.
business.
I like the saying here. It's easier to go from. I mean, it's harder to go from 0 to 1,000 sales than it is to go from 1,000 to 2,000. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, yeah.
So we have from Fiona here, and she has five questions for us. So question
Ooh.
number one, let's go. So question one from Fiona: what is the average timeline from buyer interest to close of sale with Empire Flippers? What usually makes a sale fall through at the last minute after months of due diligence? So I guess that's kind of two questions. Let's break it up. So we have six questions from Fiona. So firstly, what's the average timeline from buyer interest to close of sale with EF?
Yeah, so like I said, with usually within a 60-day
Mm-hmm.
to 90-day period. Not always, right? It depends a lot on what's going on with your business. If it's a bigger business, like a seven-figure business, it might take more than 90 days. It might take 150, 180 days to close everything. So it just kind of depends. On average, like I mentioned, 60 to 90 days is kind of the sweet spot for most businesses that we sell.
And to go the
But
other
yeah,
way,
so 60 to 90 days.
to be dramatic on the other end. It could be longer than the average. It could be much shorter than the average. Let's
Oh,
point out
absolutely.
that I reach out for seller interviews, to try to get sellers on the phone, and I generally give them, because we put in a link and the vetting team tells them to schedule the interview when the listing goes live. So I generally give them a few days after that initial listing on Monday before I reach out again.
Mhm.
So there are businesses that have already been sold within 3 days by the time I go to reach out again. So,
I think the I think the craziest one I've seen so far, at least in my opinion, was a like $100,000 Amazon affiliate site that was literally sold within 5 minutes of the listing going live by someone who just had credit on file. He's like, "Yep, that's the one." All right, man. I know you didn't do any due diligence on that, but all right, like, you didn't have a time to do a deposit, basically,
hey, when you know. So, her second part of that question: what usually makes a sale fall through at the last minute after months of due diligence?
Yeah, so when it comes to months of due diligence, you were probably talking about an e-commerce or SaaS business because usually content sites don't typically take as long for due diligence. If we're talking about due diligence with just one buyer doing it across months, like content sites could take a few months to sell, but probably have multiple due diligence or people doing due diligence, ending their diligence, and all that good stuff. But things that really mess you up in the negotiations, like the late stage, is the stuff I talked about. So, your P&L not being right, your tax returns not being right, something that's in the business, like a bunch of products, bunch of SKUs that don't make money anymore, but that's built into the valuation of the business. That could be an issue that crops up later down the road. So the most important thing for you to do is to go over your business with a fine tooth comb, put your buyer hat on, make sure you're thinking as a buyer, looking at your own business, and what would you not like to see to discover? What are the skeletons in your closet? And when you find them, take those skeletons out. Try to fix them, and fix all those
Mhm.
issues. But those are really common issues that come up in late stage
And
due
another
diligence.
issue that is quite common is being unresponsive. I've seen a deal fall through. The buyer made an offer that was within what the seller was willing to accept, but the seller just didn't respond. I want to say they were on vacation or something like that, but the deal fell through and the buyer moved on. And, so, I mean, that could be another mistake, not being responsive as the seller if the buyer is
Yeah.
interested.
Yeah,
Mhm.
definitely. It points to the buyer that, like, okay, well, this guy or girl is definitely not serious about selling their business. If they're not serious about selling it, like, this is a lot of money. Maybe there's something actually wrong
Mhm.
with the business, and I don't ever want to look at it if they start being responsive,
Yeah.
right?
So, next question: what is the profile of your typical buyer? For example, are they internet savvy people, or are they using the purchase of the site to become internet savvy and enter tech?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we actually have about six buyer personas. They're like our internal customer avatars. We actually have a blog post describing this too. If you just type in Empire Flippers buyer personas, it'll come up with the six different types of buyers. But we do have people who are new to tech, new to internet marketing, online business, who will buy a business, and say they're a mid-level or a high-level executive. They have money to spend, and they want to experiment with something, and they don't want to build something from scratch. So that is something that happens. I would say most people who are buying our business tend to be pretty familiar with online business in general. Even if they're a newbie, they kind of know what's going on when they're talking. And typically, if they are a newbie, if it, we Empire Flippers, our business analysts, will steer them towards a simpler business. So if they're brand new, they only know how to work WordPress and upload content and stuff. We're probably going to steer them more towards an affiliate site versus like a complicated SaaS business that has teams of developers they need to manage. That might be a little over their head at this stage in the
Mm-hmm.
game. But yeah, we get buyers of all types. People who buy a business, they do CRO on it. 6 months later, 12 months later, they come back to us and sell the business again. I've actually seen the same business sold on our marketplace 4 times, so that's pretty crazy. So that's a cool little business model some buyers have. Another type of buyer is like portfolio buyers, where they buy and hold their businesses and they just reap in those dividends. And as some of the businesses grow, they might sell off parts of their portfolio to get capital to inject into other parts of the portfolio to make them grow even bigger. There's also like strategic acquisition. So say I was selling personal coaching fitness video, and I see on the Empire Flippers marketplace there's this health content site all about healthy news, working out, and all that stuff. I buy that site, and now I can use both of these business to promote each other, right? So on my personal training videos, I can talk about this site like, oh, this is a great site to keep updated on everything that's going, best kind of equipment, all that good stuff. And on the flip side, that business can cross promote to that personal training site to get people to sign up for that video course or whatever it is. So that's like a strategic acquisition. One thing that is a kind of a weird one that we see every now and then is an investor who has a lot of money, a lot of capital, but they don't know anything about online business. Typically, they'll have what we call an operator in place who is the actual like day-to-day person running the business and understands it, and they have an agreement between each other of like, say the operator gets 40% and the investor, who's the money man, gets like 60%, but the investor is the guy who's laying down all the most of the financial burden of actually purchasing the asset.
And going along with that question to kind of be an add-on here is what nationality, what country do you see most of your buyers from?
Like 90% of them are American, I would say, USA, Canadian. A far second would be UK and Australia. We do see some buyers in other countries, but they're like much more
We
rare.
do see sellers from other countries though.
Oh,
Hmm.
for sure. Yeah, we have sellers from all around the world. We sold Cambodians, Vietnamese sites. Not that they were in Vietnamese or Cambodian, but the people who built them were Cambodian or
Hmm.
Vietnamese. So all across Asia, all across Europe, all across Australia. Pretty much like we even had a seller from Nigeria, and she sold her business. And like when we went to go pay out the wire, the bank called us up like, you realize you're sending money to Nigeria, right? Like, yes, we know. Like, she earned it. It's hers. Like, are you sure it's hers? Like, yes, we are sure it's hers. Like,
So, how long does a seller's website have to be in operation and show revenue before Empire Flippers will list the site?
we typically like to price everything at a
Hmm.
12-month average because that gives enough time for a buyer to really look through the data of what's going on with the business. So I would say if you're a savvy seller and you don't need the money right away, you should wait till your 12-month average of your net profit is a solid amount. Because like when you first start an e-commerce business or first start a content site, those first few months you're spending probably more than what you're earning if you're earning anything at all. And so you don't want those first initial months to be in those rolling 12 months because that's going to significantly decrease your average, right? So at least a year, or at least like a year and a half, 2 years, I'd say, before you look at
Hmm.
selling.
And in that realm, we also do have a requirement that for AdSense and affiliate sites, you need to be making at least $500 a month on average on that 12-month average, as we were talking about. But for e-commerce and Amazon FBA businesses, that average jumps to $1,000 per month.
That's right. Yeah. So any online business, our minimum is $1,000 net per month. So that includes SaaS, except for those content
Hmm.
sites are affiliate and AdSense
Hmm.
based.
And I guess briefly here, we have touched on this in a previous EF Live episode, but when we actually did go into detail about what goes into the valuation. But
Mhm.
what does determine whether we use, rather than the 12-month average, I've seen we use 6, we use 11 before. Why don't we always use 12?
Yeah, so there's different reasons. So say the business is exploding, like every month you're adding an extra $5,000 of net profit to that business. That 12-month window is no longer showing an accurate representation of what the business is doing, and that works on the other side too. So say the business was making 12 grand a month, and every single month is losing thousands of dollars in revenue. There's an obvious downtrend happening. Like, we don't want to price the 12 months where it had that golden period that like offsets this downward trend. We want to let the seller or the buyer know like this is a distressed asset, so we need to price it within that 6 month
Mm-hmm.
window. So those are some reasons why that monthly might move around a bit. It's very rare though to see anything that's different than 6 or 12 months on our marketplace. It does happen, like that 11-month one, but those are super rare,
Mm-hmm.
and usually it's a very like a unique situation with the seller.
How do you protect the seller from the buyer learning about the site's secret sauce and copying rather than buying. So that's actually interesting. When Empire Flippers, before it was Empire Flippers and it was AdSense Flippers, that was actually a problem that Justin and Joe, the owners of Empire Flippers, ran into. And that's actually the reason why the depositor system was put in place.
Yeah, exactly. So that our depositor system is the defense number one for sure about competitors,
Mm-hmm.
copycats, and all that stuff. And that stuff really is not there to necessarily protect the seller. It's really there to protect the buyer because someone's there who's going to buy the business eventually, right? So all those copycats that pop up, the seller won't care about them because he doesn't own the business anymore. It's the buyer that has to worry about them then. So that's one thing we do to protect our buyers and our sellers while they're selling their business, and it's super effective for the most part. I can't think of anyone that's copied businesses from our marketplace. I'm sure it has happened, but I can't think of any stories of it.
You mentioned that the depositor system is certainly defense mechanism one. So how deep does it go? What's defense mechanism number two?
For sure. So we might give you, all the resources to look at the site, the URL, the PNL, and all that stuff, but you still don't know all the systems of the site, right? Because we don't just give you all the SOPs of the business instantly. We're not giving you the login to their Shopify account or whatever. So there's still more due diligence that needs to happen, right? And our sales guys, they only bring qualified people to the seller. So if this guy is obviously kind of like they get a sense of sneaking around to get some data on his competitor, they're just going to shut him down. They're not going to let him continue through the sales process to actually talk to the seller and get more of that critical information that they're looking
Mm-hmm.
for. So that's another defense, is our own business analyst, and we can usually sniff those people out pretty easily because we do this every single day, right? We've sold hundreds of deals. We're in the thick of it all the time. That's one of the big benefits of going with a broker over a private sell, where you might think you got a great guy, you don't have to pay those brokerage costs, and then he gets all your information and just copies your entire story. Like, oh shit, what am I going to do now? So that's one of the big advantages of using a professional who does this every single
Mm-hmm.
day.
So, do you have any buyers willing to purchase using crypto? That's actually an interesting question, and I'm gonna let Greg tell the story because he's actually a friend of Greg's. But Greg,
Yeah.
so I'm just gonna hand it over. Greg, tell the story because it is interesting.
Yeah, so I have a really good friend. He sold a business with us. I think it was like a 250K business, and he wanted to be paid out in crypto. And as far as I know, we were the first brokers that allow people to both, like, sellers to be paid out in cryptocurrency and buyers to buy businesses in cryptocurrency. Now, we always transfer that into USD, into fiat after it's transferred to us, and it always has to be the same amount of price as the actual valuation, all that good stuff. We can't lose anything due to the speculative inflation of crypto. But yeah, so he sold this business. We paid him out the 200, his portion of the 250K after our commission in the crypto. And I think, like, just during the time it took to transfer it into crypto, he earned a few tens of thousands of dollars because last year when it was just like going up. And by the end of it all, his like 250K probably exploded into, or 250K minus a commission probably exploded right around to the 600, $700,000 mark with the price of that cryptocurrency. So that was an awesome story for him. He was extremely happy. The craziest thing about that, I was in Bangkok with him when he was thinking about selling, and he actually messaged me. We were out having a few beers. He was messaging me like, "Dude, I don't think I'm going to sell it." And his listing was going to go live the next day, like within hours, right? I was like, "All right, man, make sure you message them." And I messaged him the next day. Like, hey, you did message our people to not to put your listing live, right? Because it looks like it just went live. He's like, yeah, I forgot about it. We'll just keep going through with it. So he was very excited that he was too lazy to cancel listing his business with us. But yeah, which is awesome. There is a cool for any crypto fans out there. I have two good friends. They started a podcast called Coin Crunch. It's my buddy Sia Moager and Danny Freeze. They started Coin Crunch, and is a really awesome deep dive into cryptocurrency with like founders and all that stuff. I believe we'll actually be sponsoring their podcast soon to get the word out that we actually do accept crypto here at
Mm-hmm.
Empire Flippers. So.
And Fiona, we really hope that you feel like you got all the answers you were looking for, and Before we go, definitely ask us any more questions if you have any, and we'll try to get to them. Rahul, if you want to know the valuation of your online business, go ahead and go to valuationtool.io, and you will get redirected to the Empire Flippers valuation tool. So you can check that out right there.
We just bought that.
Yeah, I
domain.
know.
I
I felt.
pretty
I know, man. Did you like that?
I did. Good usage implementation of this new tool of ours.
So,
new domain.
Rick Baxter asks, if you have a seller doing a bit of an oversell job when it comes to downplaying some of the business's issues, how do you contend with that?
So yeah, that's a pretty common thing too, where the seller is like, my business is amazing, it's the best thing ever, and it might have a litany of problems that they're not talking about. From a seller side, say you're the seller doing that, I would coach you like, you should talk about the problems in the business, because the thing with problems in the business is, that's like, we always tell people, don't sell on potential. Don't say like, this could be $1 million business, because then you're going to get a crappy offer from that buyer, like, well, if it's so good, you should take this amount, I'll pay you when it gets that good, like all that kind of stuff. So instead of selling on potential, you should talk about the flaws of your business, like, hey, I have this great affiliate site, but the content is not that great, it doesn't convert that well compared to other sites I have. I think I really messed up on the quality of the content. And while a seller might initially think, because this is kind of counterintuitive, they might think that like, that's a bad thing to say to the buyer, my content on my site is horrible, like, why would I say that to a buyer? To the buyer, that might be an opportunity to them, like, oh, that's great to hear. I'm going to replace all this low quality content that's ranking so well with all this awesome, like, super high quality content, and that's going to immediately increase the conversions. You also mentioned the web design sucks, so I'm going to increase the CRO on the web design, and that will probably increase conversions even more. So to them, to a lot of buyers, your mistakes and your problems with the business, maybe it's just something you weren't skilled at doing, that's often the opportunity that the buyer sees. So that's one way to build the opportunity in the buyer's head without selling on potential, where they build their own potential in their own head, thinking about the flaws in the business.
Now, his second question here is actually about the seller interview that we were talking about earlier. He says, what is the process of getting picked for a seller interview, and how beneficial are those in ultimately selling the site? So, yeah, man, I can take this one. So the seller interviews are very, very beneficial, and we went into a ton of detail earlier in the episode, I guess before you got here. So if you want more information about it, definitely go and check out that explanation earlier. But I do want to answer you.
And subscribe.
It's a trap, yeah. No, I do want to answer your question here, though. It's very beneficial because it allows the buyer to get to know you, right? And we've had deals that have been held up where the buyer has said, or a potential buyer has said, look, I like everything about this business. I have all the money. I'm ready to go, except I want to hear the seller interview. So it allows the buyer to hear in your own words where you see the business going, and just kind of get to know you a little bit, because as Greg says, people like to do business with people they know, like, and trust.
Absolutely. And to answer the other part of the question, basically any business that's at that gets the list price of $45,000 or more, Jake will send out the request for you to do the seller interview with you. And it really is like an 80% of a sales tool for the reasons we just mentioned. But from a marketing side, it also gets people interested in your business again, right? So you have your first week, you go live on our marketplace, we send a ton of traffic to those new listings from our email, right? And then like week 2 or week 3, the seller interview comes out, and that's an opportunity to bring all these people back to your listing with our marketing. It's a second hit where they can come and look at your business again. And now maybe they didn't make a deposit when they first looked at the business, just reading your listing description, but then they hear the seller interview, like, okay, this sounds pretty interesting, I will make a deposit, and that person might end up buying the business.
And the other thing I want to mention on the benefit of it, let's say you had 2 months ago, you had a big drop in your business due to something maybe out of your control, maybe not, maybe you ran out of inventory, but something that doesn't accurately reflect, it's not like people lost interest in this product or this niche or anything like that. It allows you to come on and let the buyer know, hey, this is not an issue. You don't have to worry about it. This is what happened, and it can potentially save situation where the potential
Yeah, same
buyer
deal.
wasn't going
Sure.
to get on and make that deposit because things looked bad, right? You know,
Yeah, it lets you tell the story of
lets
your
you tell the
business in a
story
really
and it lets
intimate
people
way.
get to
So,
know you. It's a very fantastic sales tool, and we really encourage all of our sellers to do it. So
Jake, you'll have to send this EF Live to all
I
our
know, man. I
depositors
know. I
on
was thinking
setting up the seller
actually the
interviews.
part earlier because
Here's
the
why.
the
Watch
part
this.
earlier. This was probably about 40 minutes into this episode today. We really went into a ton of detail. I was actually thinking like, okay, how can we chop this up and really send this out because it was fantastic. And also, just I was kind of beaming earlier while you were going through your part on the seller interview just now because Rick came on before we even started talking about it and was like, and by the way, the person who does the seller interviews is just amazing. Rick, I like you. I like you. That person is me. No, I like. Thank you. Really appreciate it. We really hope that all of you find value from the content that we put out, and really appreciate that. And me personally, I appreciate that. We do have one more question here today before we're going to wrap it up. Blue Kayak asks, how do you help the seller estimate the value of the business? We do have an excellent valuation tool at valuationtool.io. Greg, can you go into a little more detail about the specifics of how that works?
For sure. So our valuation tool itself is an automated tool. So you don't need to talk to anyone or anything like that to get a ballpark estimation of what your business is going to be worth. Now, when you actually submit your business to sell with us, our vetting team takes that valuation tool and goes to our own proprietary process that looking at previous sales data, and the tool actually uses previous sales data as well for different monetizations that we have sold to help come up with the multiple. But our vetting team will take a finer comb to it and go over your business and come up with a potential range, and then they will look at a few different other factors that we can't really go into that comes up with the ultimate valuation that your business is getting. Now, before your business goes live on our marketplace, we will tell you what the valuation is, what the list price is going to be, and you have to say like, yes, this sounds great, please make it live. Or if there's an issue with it, like, hey, I don't think this is a fair valuation, this is why, and you can bring it up to our vetting team and they can look deeper into it. So your business never goes live with a list price you don't approve.
And with that said, there are occasions where your valuation may get raised because you do bring up good points to the team. So, I mean, if you do have a concern with the valuation we give you, always bring those up.
For sure. And on the other side, you might bring up a bunch of points and the vetting team would be like, no.
Yeah, no, for sure. That wasn't a you're always going to get your way. That was if you have a concern, definitely bring them up, because you may, get a higher valuation.
Yeah. And these people, they are, extremely trained professionals. They do this. This is all they do. It's just vetting. That's another thing that we have that is a real unique selling point going with Empire Flippers versus someone else is that our team, our company, the entire process from the moment you submit your site to the marketing to the sales, negotiations, and even the migrations, we have an entire team in place to handle that stuff
Every step along the way.
No other broker.
Yeah, every step along the way, we have a trained team, as you said, every step, vetting, sales, migrations, marketing, every part in getting your business sold is done by people who do those parts every single day. So that you're not going to have someone, okay, well, he's a really good salesman, but in terms of actually handling the migration, it's not.
He knows nothing about cPanels.
Greg, thank you for coming on here today. It is time to wrap it up. Guys, we really had a fantastic time. Well, at least I'm not going to speak for Greg. So I had a fantastic day today. I had a fantastic time. Greg, I hope you had fun. This is your second time on here. Maybe this one was even better. So
I feel good about this one. No hurricane questions, unfortunately. But if anyone wants to follow up with a hurricane question, just add me on Facebook. I'm addicted to Facebook, so I'll probably respond.
Oh man, weather is scary.
Weather. That's the tagline of the show.
Weather is scary. Guys, thank you all so much for joining us today. We really, really, really appreciate you with us today. EF Live coming at you every single week, Wednesday mornings, 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Hit that subscribe button down there if you like the content and want to come back for more. We coming at you every week. And also like us on Facebook and subscribe to our mailing list if you want more content like this. We really want this to be a show that is designed to help you buy, sell, and run your online businesses. That at the end of the day, that is our end goal. So always feel free to come back, ask us any questions you have, even if it's unrelated to the topic we're talking about, because we really want to help all of you. So, Greg, thank you again for being on here today. Do you have any last minute, 30-second final thought here?
No, I think we covered the majority of what we set out to do here, so I'm pretty happy with it. If anyone needs to contact me personally, like I said, you can add me on Facebook, Gregory Elfrink, or you can just email me, greg@empireflippers.com. And my inbox is often chock full, but I will try to respond to you if you ask me a question
Greg,
directly.
be responsive, Greg.
Be responsive. Be responsive.
As always, guys, feel free to reach out to me as well. And we hope that you have a fantastic day. Thank you all so very much.
See you guys.
See you, everyone.
Oh no. Awesome. Well, I think